Welcome and thank you for taking the time out of your Saturday to join us. And I'll say it again, for those of you who are new, welcome. And for those of you who were here last week, welcome back. This is the second installment of our Master of Liberal Arts Lecture Series. The Master of Liberal Arts, or MLA, fosters intellectual breadth through courses that address a range of issues from different academic perspectives. It is our hope that these diverse points of view provide insight and promote discussions beyond the talks in this series. Our theme this year is motion. To be perfectly still or frozen in time is a notable phenomenon. Motion or change of position is a familiar state. This month, we explore ways that motion is truly remarkable, having an impact on our physical and social worlds, and on a smaller scale, our personal and work lives. There will be 3 more talks regarding motion this month. This morning, David Marchant will focus his discussion on everyday movement, sharing simple practices for being present in our minds and bodies, and shows us that by finding the pleasure in everyday activities, we can disrupt our habitual mindsets and rejuvenate our joy of living. Next Saturday, Hilary Effenbein will address emotion at work. Emotion is both a kind of movement and something that moves people. And Effenbein explores the power and emotional intelligence as a mover. Our series concludes on February 26th with a macro view of motion. Zakia Luna will discuss social movements and their relationships to social change. I hope you'll be able to join us for the rest of the series. In addition, if you know anyone who is interested, please ask them to join. Now for a bit of housekeeping. You will see at the bottom of your screen the Q&A button. You can submit questions at any time. Our speaker has agreed to field these questions during the talk and at the end. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat button to ask for help. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. David Marchant is Professor of Practice in the Performing Arts Department and coordinator of University College Somatic Studies program. He has been full-time faculty member in the Performing Arts Department at Washington University since 1994. He holds a master's degree in dance and is a certified instructor in the Alexander technique. David was a company member with the Utah Repertory Dance Theater and a recipient of the Iowa Arts Fellowship for Excellence in Choreography. He has performed and conducted master classes and residencies at universities throughout the United States and abroad, including movement, arts, and design in Europe, in France, Tsinghua University in Beijing, China, Beijing Modern Dance Company, Chicago Academy of Arts, and Scripps and Pomona College. Welcome, Professor Marchant.
Thank you, Sean. So it's a pleasure to get to spend a Saturday morning with so many of you. These webinars, I'm just going to say, feel a little unusual to me, even for Zoom. I'm usually used to being able to see your faces. And of course, in my normal daily professional life, teaching dancing at universities and at Washington University all these years, I'm used to having people physically in the room together. It would truly be my preference if we were all together in a space where we could see and feel and move with each other. But there's also the advantage of using webinars like these to reach as many of you as are able to attend this morning from your homes and other spaces. So I'm glad to have the chance to connect with you any way that we can. As Sean said, I'm interested today to share with you some insights that have arisen for me over a lifetime of movement. As moving through my life in various capacities, I'm going to share with you a little bit about things I've experienced and things I've done that lead me to this place. And when people hear that I'm a dancer, there's a sort of an automatic assumption about movement as something extraordinary. But as Sean said, today's talk is actually about ways in which we can find the extraordinary in the ordinary movement of our lives, something that we easily take for granted And in my lifetime of a number of extraordinary movement skills and activities, I find with some interest and intrigue that as I age and mature as a dancer and a mover, that the beauty of the simplicity and subtlety and the nuances that are available to us at any moment in any movement that's happening in our daily life is like this miracle that's kind of like hidden in plain sight. And so today, I'm hoping to share with you a little bit about, again, where I've come from, how I've gotten here, but also try to walk you into another kind of mindful space that I've been playing with and cultivating for a number of years as a way to just keep my life more pleasurable and interesting in between the seemingly exotic movement moments. And to a large degree, that's actually where I find it most interesting now is in the, as maybe Dickinson would have put it, the blades of grass in the backyard instead of the mountaintops. So maybe I'll just start again with a little bit about where I've been in my life and where I've come from. You heard a little bit about my professional bio. It doesn't include everything that actually seems most interesting to me. I had a really wonderful free-range childhood filled with movement. My whole life has really been movement. When I was coming in to prepare for the talk today and it started scanning my credentials, I, was enjoying the reverie of kind of scanning through so many things that I've had the privilege to enjoy in life. I had a free-range childhood growing up in a neighborhood in the 70s that was bordered with still yet undeveloped land, something that's increasingly rare. But my backyard disappeared into the woods, and me and my friends were usually chased out of the house by a parent saying, "Go outside and play." And before there were cell phones, we were gone, completely untethered in the world, and out there to just scramble around in the forest, rocks, streams, feeling our bodies move. As I grew up, I had the privileged opportunities to train seriously in sports like swimming. I was a serious swimmer for a decade, put about 3,000 miles in a pool, and competed on a national level. I also, just for the fun of it, had other things like racket sports and skiing and snowboarding was in the mix. And in my adult life, when I also, began to earn some income and gain some more possibilities financially, I added more exotic movement activities like rock climbing and scuba diving. And I'm also a certified glider pilot. I like to fly those sailplanes that have no engines because I just like the freedom of the natural movement of that. So I think it's safe to say that I'm a movement activist. I really believe in and have enjoyed the privilege in my life of getting to move in just a wide range of extraordinary ways and feel my body flowing through space. I'm drawn maybe particularly to flow movements. And I'll add that all of that has, through all those years, just kept feeding into what dancing feels like me when I make choreography, when I teach students in studios, and when I perform as an artist, which even still happens to some degree today. So I really don't see, in all of those experiences, one thing I like to share is that I don't really, I no longer have the activities as separate categories, because in my life's experience, they're not separate, they are me. I am the confluence and nexus of all of those experiences of moving my body in space and environments. And so I can no longer separate them from each other. They're all kind of blended in there. And then at a certain point, another binary kind of collapsed for me that I want to talk about today, because when we think about skillful movement, when we think about even the idea of mindful movement, certain kinds of categories of things come to mind pretty easily. I don't know about you, but I've been watching the Olympics this week and feeling a lot of inspiration, witnessing these extraordinary human beings do the most extraordinary things that human beings can do. And again, given some of my own background experiences, when I watch them, I don't just see it. I actually empathetically feel what they're doing. I remember what it was like to be an athlete waiting on the starting block, and the way that your mind just kind of comes into focus. And there's nothing else there but you, the pool, the ski slope, whatever that may be. There's a magical kind of focus that sometimes people refer to as being in the zone. And so through extraordinary, sometimes even risky kinds of movement, we get this elevated idea that, well, there are some kinds of movement that are so special that they are worthy of our clear, focused, mindful attention. And we devote days and hours and years of practice, which is always, I'm going to add, for everything from artistic movement like dancing and music making. Even I think of the painters, the sculptors, those are movement artists too, because that's how their work gets made. But everybody who uses their body skillfully brings a certain training to the mindset of it as well. It's not merely that we're trying to get our bodies into these automatic states that we just get it to where we no longer have to think about it. The goal is actually to get where you've trained the skills to be so smooth and reliable that your body is fast and instinctive. And then that liberates your mind to actually be focused on the presence of how it's moving, how it's changing. So, because it's just my observation that, excuse me, for example, dancers who train too routinely, that they have practiced a dance over and over and over and over and over again until they get it to a state of automaticity, where they feel like they don't have to think about it. Those are the dancers who are most at risk of actually making errors that surprise them on stage. And so just in that context, when I'm teaching dancing students, a significant portion of the curriculum is actually the mental training to make sure that every movement you're doing is actually an experience you're having and that you're sensitive to and aware is happening, that it's intentional and not just a program that you're trying to run perfectly again and again and again. But every time it gets run, it should actually be a little bit different. It is, it's going to be different, but I want them to know that, and I want them to intend it that way, because that intention to make it a little bit different every time actually keeps it more alive, more fresh, and even visibly more beautiful to the audience, who can see and sense the presence of a live human being compared with somebody who's running a rote routine, a program. So it's important to me in these contexts. It's been part of my own research as a mover, as a dancer, and as an instructor, to actually develop cognitive strategies, mental frameworks for qualities of what I prefer to call presence. Presence, mindfulness are kind of interchangeable ideas for me, but I like presence because the word actually points us also to where the mind is full, which is in the present moment, right here, right now. And so through many years of practicing these things myself in all these different movement activities, and also getting to work with young people in studios, which I don't think of as just a teaching space. I think of it as actually more like a laboratory and workshop space. So for years, I've been bringing ideas into the studio and giving activities and parameters to students and say, okay, I want you to run an experiment here, try this, try this, try this idea. What are you thinking when you do this movement? And what was your attention focused on during that? And we've been studying collectively, for me, for the past 15 years has been kind of a centerpiece of this focus of my work, is developing better strategies for being present when we do what we do. Rolling back to where I took a little fork there, I wanted to bring us though to the observation that when we think of presence and movement, we often think of these special kinds of movement skills that we see people do, the athletes in the Olympics, professional musicians. We could go on all day long about the kinds of movement that we think of as extraordinary or special or high skill level. And again, as I said before, when we think of those, it's understandable why a person would devote time and focused presence to practice those movements, to get better and better. The assumption is, I want to get good at this. It's going to need time and attention to do that well. But then, in our weirdly kind of bifurcated lives, even people who are extraordinary movers, athletes, artists, even in their lives, we can kind of unintentionally get this binary, this split off between these things that I devote time to and are worthy of my attention and practice, and then all this other movement that occupies the rest of my day and my life, most of my day and most of my life, all this movement that is happening just to live my life, the laundry, the dishes, cleaning house, taking care of family and pets. We move all the time. But most of that we don't think of as worthy of practice. That's just stuff I got to get done. But then that right there actually sets up a framework and an attitude, an outlook on that movement that, in fact, the goal, like I even said, can happen with advanced athletes and dancers. The attitude with that is that once I've figured out how to do these movements, move my pen and my things around, type on keyboards, the goal is that I don't have to think about that anymore because I want to give my mind to something else. And all day long on campus, I watch people, walking around campus like this now. I've been working at WashU since before these existed. I remember what students looked like before these existed, and they saw each other. They saw the spaces they were moving through and in. And now it baffles me that, people can actually get where they're going like this. And I think it's, again, without being too, I understand we've layered up our lives and there's so many places we need to be, and sometimes at the exact same time. My body is here, but I need to be there in that meeting. I need to be in my email. And so we're trying to do so many things with our mind and our body simultaneously. But I do, as somebody who's been around since before iPhone and remembers the world that way, I do also have to say that I feel some worry that we are losing a fundamental connection to our bodies and a fundamental joy of what it means to be sensory experiential as a person moving through space and interacting with the things of our day and the people we would have seen if we had made eye contact with. So the thrust of the webinar today that I'm going to try to walk us up to is to see if we can figure out some strategies that are really simple because it's actually already right in front of you. And it maybe just takes a little bit of a tweak in the mindset to, and a couple of tools self up and actually experience the thing I'm doing, even if it seems mundane. Things and activities aren't mundane. That's us. It's not what we're doing. It's the way we do them that makes it feel that way. And then the result of that, approach of treating some things as mundane and allowing them to go into a mindless state is that it actually it proves us right. It convinces, after I've decided this activity isn't worthy of my attention and my presence, my engagement with it, then it proves itself to be true because I'm getting it done, but I didn't enjoy it because it was just another routine that I had to run. But I think if we can bring a little bit more mind into the matter, if we can bring a little bit of presence into the movement, even the stuff we feel like is boring could actually crack open and be noticed in new ways that would be rejuvenating of our attention, our mood, our health, our wellness. It's the way I experience it. So I'd like to share that with you today. And to do that, there are several different things that I want to try to kind of weave together that have been inspirations to me as research areas, artistic activities, some science innovation and art contributors that I want to see if I can find the intersections with, to at least lay out the premise for how this proposal works. I'm gonna not let this be a slideshow heavy presentation. In my normal work life, I am my PowerPoint in a dancing studio. So it's not my native thing to do to show pictures while I talk, but maybe a couple of things would help us. So let me just find a little thing that I can show a couple of pictures with you. The three basic elements that I want to try to kind of put together in this idea space today come from first a woman named Ellen Langer, who is a scientist at Harvard University in the Department of Psychology. And for over 30 years, Ellen Langer has been studying mindfulness with some really clever, elegant study designs that get people together who maybe have a shared kind of activity or movement skill in common, and then she puts them into study and control groups. And with the study group, she gives them a really simple suggestion. It may be as subtle and simple as, do the thing you usually do, but make it new in subtle ways that only you would know. And then she has people do their activities and then uses self-reporting measurement tools to find out the differences. Sometimes she even gets people to observe the outcomes, the people not, who don't, or are blind to the aims of the study, and can compare how they feel about one musical performance compared to another. The study person had played a piece of music, but made it new in subtle ways that only they would know. And when she runs these kinds of experiments, she has for 30 years uniformly found that if you can just use a simple twist like that to get people to pay attention to what they're doing in a novel way, that all kinds of benefits accrue. These are just some of those that she has reported in her research. That if you are operating in a mindless state, let me just share this one. Here's how she defines mindlessness. That it's an inactive state of mind characterized by reliance on distinctions, categories drawn in the past. Now, what does that mean? That means that things that we've done over and over and over and over again, we've gotten good at. That's the upside. The downside of getting good at things is that we can also become reliant on routines as a way to kind of govern how I do this, and also the assumptions in the surrounding context of what things are and what I'm supposed to do here. And so when we're in this mindset of operating in a kind of routine fashion, we're habitual, and we're letting the past kind of determine our responses in the present. Maybe we're trapped in that perspective of the assumptions of how this works and who I am and what I do. That habituality makes us insensitive to the nuances of the new context that we're in and options for new or different responses. So we become rule and routine governed, and we're just carrying out the program again and again. And then, as she puts it so cleverly, we are typically in error, but rarely in doubt about that. And as she also very sharply says, and the problem with not being there is that you're not there to know you're not there. So we even fail to recognize in these kind of contexts what it feels like to be mindless, which leaves us incapable of knowing what it would feel like if we were mindful. In comparison, she thinks of mindfulness as an active state in which the mind is noticing and seeing novel distinctions and drawing on that results in actually being in the present. This particular place, these particular people, these unique circumstances. And then we're sensitive to that in our perspective. We're no longer rule and routine dependent, but we still have those routines as kind of guideposts for our choices. But we are mindful enough in this mindful state to also recognize how a routine could be modified or adjusted for the particular situation. And, and that also helps make us more skillful in anything we're doing, whether these are movement activities or social interactions, being present to the nuances of the new context, having some experiences, things we've learned and skills we've gained to guide us in those moments makes us more effective. But we also are most effective when we're alert, alive, and adapting those skills in the present moment, in the present context. And the result of that state of mind is one of engagement and noticing novelty in the environment. And that produces a more fluid, interactive state that is also more joyful to be in than being governed by routines. And in her research over the years, these are just some of the effects that she has found in her research, that in a mindless state, we experience burnout, accidents, prejudice, stress, and then maybe coping strategies with alcohol, pain. These are some of the side effects of mindlessness. Whereas compared to people who've been taught to bring a little bit of more mindful attention to their daily activity, experience innovation, charisma, leadership, productivity, memory, better attention, better learning, of course, more satisfaction in our relationships. Our self-esteem goes up if all that's working well. Positive affect, as in better mood. Even, I may have to share with you an example from the research just to kind of show how it works. But she has even shown people to improve their vision, their hearing, lose weight, and increase their longevity by just bringing simple tools to the way that we approach our normal movement and our normal interactions in life. So maybe giving just a little bit of example here, there's two that I find really, really intriguing. One, she takes a group of women who are house cleaning for hotels. And these are people who work all day long using their bodies to do movement. And those movements obviously and easily become mundane and routine, probably even boring, they would report. And Ellen got a group of these service workers to participate in a study, and she took the 100 of them and divided them into two groups. In one group, all of them, she starts by asking, do you get any exercise? Do you exercise? Sorry, that was the question. Do you exercise? No, we don't exercise. There's no exercise. That practices her, but she takes 50 of those 100, and she just teaches them to notice that what they're doing all day long is already exercise. that, like making the bed is like flicking the sheets out over the bed is like a rowing machine. She gives them analogies like this, where they can start to think of like lifting objects and nothing but movement, nothing but exercise all day long. She just shows them that it's true and convinces them to use this word exercise and now map it on top of what they do as work. And that 50 people in 2 weeks, in just 2 weeks' time, compared with at the end of the 2 weeks, she asks everybody, did you do anything different? Did you add any exercise to your life? No, nothing else changed. The only difference in the study group was that one group is thinking of what they do now in a new mindset, and that wakes them up to noticing things that they've been taking for granted and thinking about those movements that they do all day long as maybe health beneficial. Because the word exercise signals to us, this is good for me. And so that group of people, they reported feeling happier, healthier, and this one should shock us. They actually lost weight, doing nothing more than they were already doing. That the mindset alone triggered the body to actually start burning calories. Take another example that's near to my own field, because she studied a group of classical musicians, and she did this really clever thing. She brought a group of musicians in, recorded sessions of them playing pieces of beautiful music. And again, like her other one, she gets that group and she divides them into two so that she can get a comparison. And in one group, she says, I want you to think of a piece of music that you have played many times. And I want you to think about a particular performance that you felt satisfied with, felt like you did a good job at it. And now I want you to try to play it just like that again. Study group, she says, I want you to play this piece of music that you're good at, but when you play it, I want you to make it new in subtle ways that only you would know. And she points out, these are classical musicians, they're not jazz musicians. It's going to be subtle, to be sure. But it's just this mindset for them that they're going to just nudge the dynamics, maybe a little faster here, a little slower there, change the volume of it, the amplitude of the sound. Just these little tiny modifications. And again, mainly just for them to know that they're making those choices. And she recorded all of these, and then she plays the recordings for people who know nothing of the experiment. And she points out, overwhelmingly, listeners of the two recording sets, by and large, prefer the music played by the people who were actively engaged in those subtle little decisions. So she says, we can hear presence, we can see presence. And of course, the musicians also themselves reported far more joy and satisfaction in playing the music. So Ellen Langer's research has been particularly inspiring to me, and it intersects directly with another one of my areas of study and expertise, which is somatic practices. As Sean mentioned, in University College, I am an instructor and also the coordinator of an area in that program that offers courses in dance and somatic movement study. And there's also a certificate program for people who want to do like a little mini minor in courses that teach people skills for being mindful in certain kinds of special activities, like we know, like yoga or Tai Chi. But then there is also this other branch of things that are just kind of bringing presence to the awareness of our bodies, just for its own value, learning to study to be more sensitive to changing relationships in muscle tone or breath. And so there's a variety of things. And again, here, maybe just for a moment, I'll bring my screen back to show you some of what somatic practices are done and studied for. And this is an area that I am pleased to say has been also steadily growing in awareness in mainstream culture. These are a variety of things, some you've heard of, like the pictured yoga and Tai Chi, and then other things that maybe are not as familiar to us in Western culture. The picture on the left with the two people is a woman teaching another student the Alexander technique. But what they all kind of share in common, regardless of the particular method, somatic practices offer tools for mind-body integration, we might describe it. And you'll notice that's not a typo. I put the words mind and body right up against each other without a space, because the words, quite frankly, are not quite adequate to the goals to the subject we feel like we're studying. We have a word mind and we have a word body, and it can lead us falsely to perceive those things as separates. And sometimes we'll speak of it like, oh, I really need to get more connected to my body. But then that leaves us with some impression that it's like these tinker toys and this little colored stick putting them together. But the truth is, the mind and the body were never separate, never can be separate. It's always integratively functioning. The question really isn't if I need more mind-body connection. It's maybe that I just want to become more aware of the way that my mind and body aspects of the whole are interactively influencing one another for better or for worse. And so these methods exist that we broadly call somatics to offer people different kinds of strategies for learning to be more aware of those inter-influential relationships of the aspects that we call the mind and the aspects we call body. But when you do this long enough, you start to feel like the mind is thoroughly distributed in the body, and the body is always there making a mind function. These practices serve as like movement meditations. We often have an idea of meditation as something where the body gets very still. And the primary focus is to get into clear head. But these practices offer, for people who, like me, who can't sit still, ways to meditate by actually moving with clarity and intention, and studying the self from within the experience. They're used for a variety of purposes, like improving self-awareness, improving movement functioning, overall personal health. They can even be therapeutic in terms of restoring movement skill or vitality. And some examples in the list I've given are yoga, Tai Chi, we've heard of, Alexander technique. And of course, I think of dance as somatic inherently. And then there are branch off modalities we call dance movement therapy. So some things like that. For me personally, as Sean mentioned, I'm certified in the Alexander technique. So this is a thing I spent 3 years studying as a kind of master's degree, supplemental master's degree. And in the Alexander technique, this is Frederick Matthias Alexander pictured here at a stage in his life when he is working with he's been through a process of studying his own movement and in a process to restore better balance and coordination. And then further on in his years, he realized that it was something that he wanted to teach other people. And then after that, he realized that it would need more teachers. So he also taught people to be teachers of the work. And what you see happening in this image is Alexander is using very subtle, gentle, guided hands to offer feedback to a person about their body, their posture. And then what we can't show easily in a picture is that we examine really simple basic movements like how we stand up out of the chair, how we sit down. I'm going to go into more detail about this in just a moment, because I actually want us to experience some things today. And this is among them, the things that we can try ourselves. It's just some other example images of teachers working with students. What we can see in the lower left-hand corner picture is that sometimes what a student of the work would do would be lying on a flat surface where gravity helps to distribute the body structure. When we do this, it's a mindful meditation of pay attention to what my body feels like in relationship to the ground and the gravity, to allowing the surface, in this case a table, but could just be your floor, lying on a flat surface, gives you a feedback about the alignment of your spine. So Alexander technique is interested in our posture, in gaining a kind of an idealized alignment like you see here in these students, but also the teachers working on our posture, but not merely posture as a correct shape, like we sometimes think of it, but posture as a new kind of state of fluid, buoyant, efficient flow. And so we kind of convert posture from being a static problem to solve to being an effect of mindfully aware movement, where we're more sensitive to how our body is balancing. And again, how it's not mindlessly doing things in habitual rote ways. Alexander shares in common with the things I shared from Ellen Langer, a discovery that habitual movement becomes numbing and leads to illness and strain in the body. And the only solution to that, whether it's the Alexander technique, yoga, again, you can pick a brand of approach, but what's shared in common in all of these approaches is that the solution to that is to find a way to get your mind more engaged in what's happening, where you can feel your balance, where you can make the subtle adjustments and, and become much more involved in it. And just to give you an idea, because again, you see in all these pictures, people seated and teachers guiding them. There's a lot of, I just like to point out again, because my theme isn't about exotic things like dancing, it's actually about the most ordinary things. And just to put in perspective that in my day job, I'm going into studios and I'm teaching people to do these amazing and beautiful, extraordinary things. But in the Alexander training, we're doing stuff like this right here, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, 6 semesters. I have a master's degree in standing up and sitting down. And you can't imagine how much more interesting than that is until you actually practice it like it counts. And if I could make that more interesting, what I can tell you is that when I was in my Alexander training and we were doing things like this, I had a teacher helping me with feedback from tactile to notice how my postural habits had become. And then you wake up to that and you can make changes, or how I sit and stand. Not any of the Alexander training did I do any dancing in that context. And yet, continuously, while I was learning to just simply and clearly monitor my own balance and weight shifting in the smallest of ways, all of my dancing got better and better and better. I went from chronically in pain as a dancer who believed that that's the way it was going to be. I was 35 at the time, and I'm thinking, well, I'm getting old. I'm a dancer, and 35 is old to dancers, or so they think. And so at 35, I'm in chronic pain. I'm already starting to reduce the things that I do. I have my students dancing full out, but I just kind of do stuff small because it hurts if I do it big. And through the Alexander technique, standing up and sitting down, standing up and sitting down, standing up and sitting down, but studying it, not taking it for granted, being absolutely present and mindful in every nuance of that weight shift, I figured out how to better coordinate and balance the body. And through that, I stopped injuring myself when I danced. And then I could go back to dancing fully again. And what I am proud to share is that I'm about to turn 56 and I still dance pain-free now, 20 years later, after just getting my head in it a little bit more alive and interested in small things, not just the big grandiose things that we show people, but the joy of the experience of it. And that led me with great curiosity to be interested in everything, all movement, in Alexander technique, we do these special idealized activities like you see in the pictures. But the real point of Alexander technique isn't that I have to again create another bifurcated binary where I have to set aside 30 minutes and I need to do my lying down and I need to do my meditative stand up and sit down. We do that, but that isn't the final goal or the point of it. The point of that is to tune it up, get my head in it, so that then when I go out of the practice time and into the world where I am just handling the things and doing the chores and walking to class, being on Zoom and doing email, all of that stuff. Now, the real goal is that I get so practiced at being mindful in simple, small things that mindfulness now becomes actually part of the habits that I use to do all of the tasks of my day. Now that's the idealized, it's not perfect, and my attention still goes in and out and up and down all the time too. And that means that I find myself mindlessly just like powering through the thing, trying to get it done. Sometimes I actually wake up and disrupt that and then notice that I have choices. Sometimes I turn the laundry into a dance just to make it more fun. I'm going to have to do this anyway. Maybe I can throw my headphones in, put some music on, and make that actually feel like something that's more fun to do. So that's another one of the threads that I wanted to share with you today is, and again, we're going to get to a phase here shortly where we can actually do a little bit of experiential. And the final thing that I wanted to just obviously point out is that my primary profession as a dance artist, as a mover who makes artwork that's made of human movement. For over a century, the modern dance movement, which is my branch of dance, has included artists like Martha Graham, Jose Limon, Catherine Dunham, a wide range of people who just kept exploring how movement could be personal, could be unique, didn't have to look like anybody else who came before. They could find their own. And so I think of modern dance as also this lineage of very mindful, intentional movement, exploratory, innovative movement that has proliferated countless numbers of new styles of dancing that today we enjoy as viewers, but I and my students get the pleasure of experiencing. And from modern dance, the piece that I want to bring into our look at it today is just this core little nugget that I said that human movement can be artwork. So if I call it dance, then you get images like on my screen. It's very elaborate and highly refined, highly skillful things. Most people looking at the pictures are like, yeah, that's those people. That's not me. The most common response when I introduce myself and I nervously say I'm a dancer because I know the next thing I'm going to get back is, oh, that's so interesting. I can't dance. And at this point now, 30 plus years into my field, I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means I can't dance because I've been playing with movement as artwork for so long and kind of tinkering with not just the big obvious stuff, but also the really small, subtle internal dimensions of that I've realized that dancing, or at least the idea that dancing is something a little more than ordinary. Again, we've got these categories of the ordinary movements I do. If I think of my laundry and my dishes as different than my dancing, then of course they're going to be different. But if I just let a little bit of that mindset, like Ellen Langer did, what if I map a little piece of the movement as artwork, aesthetically beautiful, sensorily interesting, and I just bring that mindset over here and put it on the laundry? What do I notice new? Subtle things that only I would know. It doesn't even necessarily change the way the laundry looks. If somebody were walking by and saw me doing it, I'm not saying that they're going to see me like folding the shirts and making a big display of it. It's not about that for me. It's really about actually experiencing the movements that have to be done, and that when I bring that attention to it, maybe I even get more interested in the precision of it. It might take me, sometimes it takes me a little bit longer, but only if I'm actually interested enough to spend the time. Interestingly, more often, by just getting interested in what I'm doing, I'm actually faster and even more efficient at those tasks. I do get them done, sometimes even faster, because I'm actually in it instead of multitasking and distracted. But I've also experienced the task and found some way to appreciate it, or to appreciate me doing it. And I think that's the come back to, there are certain things that we think are worthy of practice, like skiing, dancing, playing the violin. And then there's all this other stuff we ignore as if it's not worthy of practice. Well, maybe the laundry isn't worthy of the practice, but I am. And that's one of the deep underlying principles of somatic practices, is that I am worthy of the attention and the intentionality of everything I do, and not ranking it out in these categories where some things get special attention and other things just need to be, moved behind me as quickly as possible and with as little attention as possible. So if I can kind of put together all of these, if I can kind of try to draw the threads together of these three different ideas and approaches. Again, we on one hand, we've got Ellen Langer, who's showing us with really good evidence, actual science, that when you just put your mind in a thing, anything, that you get more satisfaction out of it and even more skill out of it, whatever it is. And that jibes with me with somatic practices and Alexander technique, which also study how habitual mindlessness can cause error, body injury and strain, long-term chronic stuff, right? That you're just like, I'm just being me, it's normal, it's fine, I'm familiar with this, I don't notice that there could be a choice. But when we start to tune to the awareness of what our body is doing, we do notice that there are choices there. And then when we start to try some of those other choices, the thing that seemed so same old, same old, same old becomes new. Thing that you've done your whole life could be new over again. And then maybe there's actually pleasure and enjoyment in the sensation of it. So, and again, from my modern dance, I've been taught that everything can be dance. I wish I had some pictures. I should have pulled one up. There was a movement in the 60s where, after most of a century, where the modernists were stretching movement into new shapes and new styles and new forms, beautiful things, but all still pretty elite and pretty refined. And then in the 60s, these couple of different artist collectives, the Judson Church and the Grand Union, were a group of people who weren't particularly skillful, trained dance bodies. They were ordinary people, but they were taking ordinary task movement activities and then putting them on stage for people to look at, like, this is art. It's a little bit like how Duchamp had done with a porcelain urinal. Took a urinal and put it in an art gallery. And it was very controversial, of course. It upset some people, amused and intrigued others. But his point was, if I take this mundane, ordinary thing and I put it in a place where you're used to looking at things as if they're special, does it make it special? Or are you actually the source of the specialness? So it was an experiment in perception. And then in movement art, the Judson Church and the Grand Union people were doing the same thing with ordinary everyday movements. They were just like moving objects around in the space with audiences there watching them do it. I'm not saying that it was exciting or good, but I have to imagine that people who witnessed those performances next time they went back and did one of those ordinary tasks, noticed it and remembered that they had gotten woken up to it. So sometimes the artists were doing these kinds of things of actually trying to argue that any movement, every movement, anybody, everybody could engage in the essential practice that dance is, the idea that human movement can be aesthetic. It is inherently aesthetic, which means that we feel it. Could we make the feeling of it more enjoyable? So I'm going to just check in with Pat for a moment, because maybe there have been a couple of questions and maybe we could pick a couple of those. But again, I want to actually offer an activity as a way to jumpstart my proposal.
Sure. Let me give you a couple of the shorter questions, and then we can come back to some of the longer ones.
Sure.
So one person asks, have these techniques been studied to see if they might be helpful in treating people with mood disorders or other psychiatric conditions?
I can't put my fingers on the studies that you're asking about, but I know that they have, and I know that the answer is yes, and they do. This kind of thing does and can help. Again, Ellen Langer's research also looked at mood and depression and things like these, and she also found experimental evidence that bringing mindfulness to anything or everything you do, any particular thing, or even the stuff that easily we miss, does have psychological benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And just my own experience, I know that it's true too.
Yeah. And then another question, what mindfulness techniques would be most useful during the pandemic with its more limited range of individual activities and motion?
Yeah, thank you. And that's actually kind of part of the point of this webinar is, we know that after 2 years of a pandemic, we've spent a lot more time at home than maybe we were doing before. And I, as a movement artist, I've been actually interested to see how many people in the confronted with the boredom. Again, is your home boring, or is it just that we've been living in it the exact same kind of routine way for so long that we stopped noticing? We probably loved our home the week we moved in, and then why does anything that we loved when it was new fade off? Is a question that leads us to contemplate, well, what is it about the new that makes us feel so good? And do we always have to make the new be things? Couldn't the newness just be that high, that rush we get from newness? And for years before the pandemic, we're all running around going everywhere. We're going to restaurants, we're going to plays, we're going to foreign countries. We get out there to keep stimulating a sense of newness. And we get used to making life new through new things, new places, new people. In the pandemic, we got squished. We got squeezed into being in the same place with the same people, and our work, our life, same place. Some people's experience of that has been confinement, reduction of happiness, a sense of loss and limitation. But I've also witnessed other people who, once they finally hit the wall of that feeling of boredom, also started to make their life in their home new again. People took up gardening, people got pets, that was a new thing. People started baking, like, what can I do in this space? Is a perfect example of how people have, even the upside, leveraged the pandemic to kind of go deeper into smaller spaces and to notice what's there, what has been there all along, but we kind of needed to be pushed into the smaller, into the quieter, and for many people that brought them into themselves too. Sometimes that's a challenging confrontation, and for some people that has actually been an opportunity for growth. So I don't see the pandemic as good or bad necessarily, as a stimulus that we're all responding to. And here again, in the nature of my talk, is the question of what is my response? And how am I bringing my present adaptive attention to the circumstance that's presented to me? How am I working with this? And can I be playful? Can I alter the approach or the habit in some way that makes it fun again? Dig something out of something I already had but was taking for granted. In my house, we took board games and we abandoned the old rules. Instead of buying a new game, we took the same set of pieces and just started creating new games with those parameters. We got a new game without buying one. Maybe one more question, and then again, I'm going to try to get us to try an action, just to try an activity, just to see how it works.
Sure. Here's a question about teaching. Teaching is a multi-dimensional set of motions. What roles do the design and presentation of pedagogy play in inculcating the experience of intellectual motion? As a student travels through the activity of engaging and immersing themselves in a dance with the concepts, empirical information, explanatory principles, definitions, and standards, which make up a specific pedagogy. This is a long question, but I think the end, I think the end kind of summarizes this, and that is, what are some of the ways teachers and faculties can learn how to intentionally incorporate this type of thinking into teaching course?
I love this question, even in its full complexity, but getting into that kind of core of it at the end. What do we do as teachers? For me, there have also been overturned upheavals in my way of teaching. I was taught as a dancer. I'm just going to use my example as dance, but look for the analogies, and if your teachers out there, look for the analogies. As a dancer, I was taught in a room where there's a teacher showing me what to do. My job is to copy it, get it right, get the corrections, make it right. And I learned that way. It worked, I guess, pretty well for me. Maybe I succeeded in that model because I was capable of seeing and replicating. And I think a lot of dancers become dancers because they succeed at that model. But it also became intriguing to me as I went through this and as I started to learn about my body, my awareness of it, and the Alexander technique had this radical kind of flip for me of noticing the difference between habitual means and mindful approach towards goals. And that really changed my whole outlook and mindset when I started challenging my own habits of, I'm just teaching the way I was taught. I go into the room, I show, they copy, works. But the more I thought about that, the more I realized, well, I'm also undermining other goals. Like, my tradition as an art form is one of individuals finding their own voices, creating their own styles. So is it working if I just go in there and imprint my own style on a group of dancers and magically hope that they will somehow then figure out their own thing on their own time? Couldn't I, this was the question that formed it for me in the studio, how could I help dancers improve their technique? And by that, I mean the base things like flexibility, balance, ability to control the movement of my body, proprioception, the ability to feel. How can I help them develop those fundamental techniques while still leaving them free to do so by moving their own way? So now when I teach, instead of showing, I give verbal cues. Like the other day with the beginner class, I said, let's start with a basic element of dancing, which is that we kind of use our body to design shapes in space. What are some basic tools we use? Straight lines. Okay, what can we do with a straight line? Can you do that with your arms? Can you do that with your legs? Can you make it slightly curve? Can you make it move in fluid waves? So I'm just kind of giving them these prompts to get them to basically reinvent it themselves. I can shortlist for them what I know dancers' bodies need to be able to do to control it, but I don't want to teach them only by giving them my style, my techniques, my controls. I want them to kind of grow it organically. So I think more the classroom, for me, the mindset is more like this is an ecosystem of different living beings. And if they dynamically interact with each other and some core shared principles, then we're gonna get more styles, we're gonna get more skills, and people are also gonna own that. They're not gonna just be trapped in the model of trying to imitate it. So there's just one example I could share as ways in which bringing some mindfulness to the routines of the way I do a thing suddenly popped out for me an awareness that there were more options that I wasn't trying, partly because of fear. Like, I don't know if this will be good. I don't know what the students will think of this. You know, there's all these obstacles. Like, I know how this works, I'm good at it. And so it's an irony that Ellen Langer points out that often the obstacles to our future growth are actually our prior success. Like, what worked in the past becomes too much of a trap for us to be willing to risk coming at it from a slightly different angle. So I think broadly for educators, I think that there's an interesting question about how did we learn? What were the most meaningful learning moments? Were they really actually somebody telling us information, or were they when we finally started engaging with it ourselves? Could we make more of our education kind of function around collective guided shared discovery? And that's been the major overturn for me in how I think of teaching dancers, for example. But I think there's probably a widely applicable kind of principle there. Yeah, great question. So again, I'm keeping an eye on my clock, and I didn't want to let this end without giving you a chance to just try something as simple as I'm saying it is. But let me just see, what would we try here to start with? Okay, let me give an example. So I spent a year studying Tai Chi Chuan in between my graduate school and coming to WashU. I needed a gap year, and I wanted to learn something other than the dance techniques. And again, maybe that was an early state of me realizing I need something new for my own movement life to reactivate it. And that year of Tai Chi really changed my dancing. But Tai Chi, if you study it in its classical form, is a really specific, I mean, the choreography is really particular, and it takes you a while to get those movements learned. And then next to get them kind of fluid, where it feels like, now I actually understand what these movements are kind of intended to be about and to do. Again, the risk would be, though, that as you practice and practice and practice, it would become routine, rote, and I could actually run that dance while I'm thinking about everything else I have to do afterwards. And in doing it that way, I realized it was starting to fail to work for me. Part of the learning process was it was so new that I had to devote my attention, and that was part of why I was getting a lot out of it, right? And then as I got better and better and better at it, and I could do it and think about other things, I wasn't getting as much out of it. So this was just one of my modern dance, Ellen Langer, make it new, but in this case, not so subtle ways, that I said, well, what is the essence of this form? That there's this quality of kind of buoyancy or sinking or of moving forward or retreating, that the movements were typically slow and fluid. And I just said, well, what if I rest the classical choreography form? Again, I'm a modern dancer. I take liberties with forms. I reinvent and make them my own. And so I just started doing a thing I call My Chi. And I invite you to try this. If you don't have the time, I mean, first of all, I encourage you to go take a class with Dirk Killen in University College, because he's an absolutely amazing expert at Tai Chi Chuan. And I'm honored to know him. And so it's useful to devote ourselves to forms. So I'm not dismissing that. But I'm also saying in balance to that, I think that there's also something valuable about being playful and experimental with forms. And so again, if I'm just offering us all here, so that you've got a little more room, you can stay seated, you can stand up if you prefer, but even just beginning with our hands, I would say start with just the imagination that there's some kind of an invisible, subtle, tactile object here. In dance, we do activities like this we call energy ball. And so I'm imagining that there's some sort of soft, subtle, fluid, energetic thing here. And I'm just going to start almost like a fidget toy or a piece of clay. But notice I didn't need to buy a piece of clay or have it next to me. It's already me. I'm the clay in this game. And so as my imagination sort of starts to follow this, I might even bring my vision to play in it. And optically, I know that I can only actually see my hands themselves, but I can start to use my mind and my imagination to watch the object that I shape, stretch, kind of wind like a thread, flatten, spread. Let your mind have the enjoyment to just actually be playful for no other reason than that it becomes attentive. I move my hands every day to do all kinds of things. And I've got all of that life's experience of interacting with and handling objects. So I've got technique for this. We're so good with our hands. We do so many things of skillful nature that we can start right here. So if I just kind of want a meditative thing to do that isn't sitting still, I can make something up like this. So that's one kind of approach, is to just let movement be beautiful, simple, immediately available as your hands are. You've got these, they're there for you. But you've also got your imagination. And if you put the imagination and your hands together, there's something there that can help wake us up. So that could be a thing that I could have been doing that this whole time, sitting here talking to you in the webinar. So if you're stuck in Zoom, if you're stuck at home, you've always got your hands. Now, there's another thing that I'll share with you. I'm going to acknowledge up front that this is a little silly because most good play is, if you really think about it for a moment, most good play is silly, but it's also the kind of thing that Dr. Stuart Brown, he established a thing called the National Institute for Play. And I should have queued up a slide for him in this. National Institute for Play, he wrote a book called Play. He's been studying play behavior in humans and animals for a good chunk of his professional career. And he's come to the conclusion that play is purposeless, but absolutely essential to human wellness. That he did case studies, he studied people who had done terrible antisocial things like, people who had been murderers, or he'd gotten chances to interview people who had serious, severe difficulties in their life socially. And in almost all of them, when he did case studies on their play lives, found that this was an insufficient sort of malnourishment in their development, was insufficient amounts of play. So, and human beings are unique in the animal world, he discovered too, in that all animals actually play, but through various developmental stages. And then at some point, most animals, that play phase kind of solidifies neurologically into, I don't know about that though, because my dog plays, wants to play all the time. But human beings are known to be actually play animals through the entire lifespan. That's something that we can do. Stuart Brown is arguing we should play. Okay, so that's my starting premise here for what I'm about to suggest, which is an assignment I often give to my dancers, because again, I'm trying to stretch them. I'm trying to get them out of locked mindsets about what dancing is, and I'm trying to open it up for them. So pedagogically, I might send them home with homework to say, I want you to dance anything for 1 hour. So we don't have an hour. We've just got a little bit of time here, but you could take this on your own time and try it at a longer stretch where I think you would discover more of it. But the basic premise is that, like I described before, any ordinary movement task that you would do in a day, but you treat it with that sort of dance mentality. So let me help you with here. There was a man in the early 20th century, a guy named Rudolf Laban in Germany, began sort of analyzing and studying how human beings move. And he was interested in kind of getting what are the essential principles of dancing. And if I oversimplify his theory and I bring it all the way down, I can kind of get to 3 primary colors of movement: time and space and effort. And all movement we do will have all 3 pieces in it: time and space and effort. So the activities that I do, if I'm just kind of moving objects around, they are moving through space. So there's some sort of spatial shape or pattern or design. And then they're occupying time as the activity unfolds. And we're using a degree of effort to make that happen. And in dancing, if you take it down to its simplest essence, it's that dancing is in some way more than ordinary, or we've bent or tweaked those essential ingredients until they become extraordinary. So just as an example, I've got this tea mug here, and the normal thing to do is usually a straight path at a normal effort and a standard duration of time. But on Ellen Langer's proposal, make it new in subtle ways that only you would know, that could involve just a little bit of an indirect path, or a subtle change in the timing, where I make it go slower for a moment. Or if it's not a cup of tea that I'd slosh, I could make it go fast. So here's my proposal to you. If you want to try one more little game, is just take a moment and wherever you're seated, rearrange the objects on your desk, or if you need to get up from the computer because there's nothing in front of you, just go neaten or straighten something, or it does not matter. It's not the what, it's the way we do it. And the proposal is to just alter either the spatial pathway or the timing, the speed, the duration of that movement, and just bring a little bit more art or intentionality to the aesthetic qualities of the movement that's already happening. Just try this for a couple of minutes on your own, and let's just see what that feels like. And we may have questions to follow this, and I want to make sure that there's little bit of time for it. And while you're beginning that, I'm just going to keep cueing a little bit. You still have the choice, like how big and exaggerative an unusual alteration of the space or the time or the effort. You get to decide, is it something that's like really unusually different and somebody in your household would notice it and say, what are you doing? Or do you want to play Ellen Langer's game of make it new in subtle ways that only you can feel? So the range of that is up to you. It could be something that you play like a secret hidden spy game when you're out in public, where you know that you're moving along curves and pathways as you shop. Or it could be, I've had students who take this assignment and I had one student who was a barista at Starbucks, and she started dancing, making the coffees. She was at the machine, and she started getting more fun with how all of the, she has to move milk and coffee and there's all these actions. She starts dancing it, and before she knows it, she had the entire line crew dancing their jobs without saying anything about why. So it even spread when she willingly let that be public and visible. And then I just love getting the reports back from students who, this is my prerogative as a teacher. I get to make them try things that I know they wouldn't do if it weren't an assignment. But once they've done them, I can see also the lights go off and the transformations, not just in their ideas that, oh, dancing could be anything, but I think they notice how it wakes themselves and even the people around them up. And I think that's the other piece of evidence of what folks like Alexander, Ellen Langer, and I are trying to inspire and invoke in the world. We can wake up, we can make it new. So let's do a couple more questions.
Okay,
I wish
great.
that I could see people. This again feels strange to me. We got 8 minutes, so.
Great. So David, could you distinguish maybe between mindfulness and something we might call overthinking something? So for example, Ellen Langer asked these musicians to, subtly change what they were doing as a kind of awareness, but we could also imagine a musician who's performing and is suddenly so aware that they can no longer, that they freeze, that they just can't move through it automatically anymore.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, there is definitely a version of attention that can interfere. Again, I've been watching the Olympics and I've witnessed it and I know what it feels like. I've done it, where you just get so hyper-focused on something that I think some of what's described there too sounds to me like, maybe it's not in all cases, but in some of the cases like that, where you get over hyper-focused, there's a narrowing of attention. There's a narrowing of attention involved. So the attention may be on, but it's also kind of tunneled and it's maybe prioritizing things. It might even be interfered with in the background by fear. Like it's the athlete or the musician who blows a performance because there's also an agitated state of fear of failure and all the potential ripples and effects of that. But the people who, in contrast, describe a state of flow don't seem as encumbered by those internal questions and doubts and fears that are like, I could be hyper-focused on my fears, but it's not actually helping me to engage with skill. So maybe what I would offer here is that for me, the distinction is that if that over-focused sounds like I'm over-focused on me and my thoughts about what I'm doing, but that's kind of like another binary separation from the actual experience of doing it. And a state of flow is more commonly characterized as I'm experiencing what's happening and I'm also present to, aware of, and interacting with what's around me. So I'm taking in the cues from the context. Maybe for the musicians as the example, maybe they're not merely like plagued with what do I do, but they're actually hearing back their own sound. I'm not sure, it's an interesting question to ask, but my own experience is that flow states, I'm getting partly out of myself and recognizing that my movement with and interacting with relationship, that reestablishing part of my mindfulness goes into reestablishing relationality, and that gets me out of my own head and into the pleasure of the interactions. And then that seems to engender better performance. So the skier focusing on the snow instead of just their technique. Yeah, great question. I'm thinking out loud, trying to put a finger on that one.
Another question. Are there any Alexander technique classes, teachers, therapists in St. Louis.
Yes. And thanks for the opportunity to promote that in the University College. My colleague and friend, Dawn Karlovsky, she both went through that training program together, same time. Dawn Karlovsky teaches a group class in Alexander Technique through University College in the spring semester. So that's running right now on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 p.m. That's an example. But there are people like myself and Dawn and a few other teachers, Catherine Mitchell, who teach in the St. Louis area. And the normal mode, like those pictures I showed, is individual private lessons. Sometimes teachers set up group lessons like Dawn does in U College. But there's a couple of ways you can study that. The main thing I would point you towards is the resource to find teachers. I'm debating if I take the time to pull it up online and then put it in the chat. My certifying organization is American Society of Alexander Teachers, or the acronym is AMSAT, AMSAT.org. And so if you go to, maybe that's what I can just do is, do I have access to the chat if I put that in here? I think it's org or com. Oh, there it is. It actually converted it for me. Oh, hi, Gray. Nice to see you. That's one of the other teachers in St. Louis. So amsatonline.org, they'd changed the web address. So there you can go and you can look regionally. If there are folks of you not in St. Louis and you live somewhere else, there are teachers all over the country and you can find them in that website. Can we fit another couple of questions?
I think we're about out of time. I'm going to give you a chance to any closing remarks, and then Sean will end things for us.
Well, I don't know if I've said so much. I don't know if I have anything more to add. I think my main point here is, again, that everything you do is worth your attention because you are worth your attention. And when we just start to bring that, the pleasure of experiencing what we're doing back into the tasks, no matter how mundane they may seem, there's usually more hidden there, but we've gotten so kind of habitually blinded to it that we're just not noticing it. My main message today is be playful. Just try new things, but also try old things new ways. Have fun with it. Make it musical, make it beautiful, even if that's just your own definition. So thank you guys for giving me the chance to share this strange and marvelous way of being.
Absolutely. And thank you, David, for your presentation today. My takeaway is, we're in the movement anyway. Why not make it more interesting, right? Just like you said, play with it. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us and hope to see you all next week. Thank you.